Today, Stand for Truth Radio is presenting God's views on political news. It's our opportunity to tell you about politics and news, but with a twist. We also tell you what God's views would be on politics and news today based upon his word in the Bible. Now, we are taping this show today because Bill had a prior commitment for Tuesday, which is normally the time that our show airs. So we're going to just say a little remembrance today for those who have died sacrificing for our country. This is Memorial Day. We do honor those individuals, and we thank you for your sacrifice and the sacrifices of your family.
Amen.
Amen. So, Bill, let's get started. There's been a lot in the news with what's been going on with President Trump with his first visit overseas. I have never in my lifetime seen such a celebration as I saw in Saudi Arabia. What do you think?
Well, they certainly did literally roll out the red carpet, didn't they? So
they did.
There was a lot of pomp and circumstance. Yeah, I mean, it was good to see that when they greeted the president, he didn't bow down to the king.
And you know what else was good to see? That the king actually came there to greet him, because when Obama went, he sent I don't know, I'll say flunky for a better word, lack of a better word, but the king certainly didn't go and meet Obama at all, but the king was there meeting President Trump at the airport, which was something is sort of unheard of and unseen. But I have never seen such a celebration throughout. I don't know, it seemed like a week, and what were they there, 2 days? I mean, it seemed like nonstop.
Well, again, it was quite the greeting. You would hope that what we saw was indicative of a true intention to want to cooperate with the Trump administration as it relates to the eradication of ISIS and things like that. Of course, it's another one of those areas we're going to have to wait and see, because, not to sidetrack us here, but, in the back of my mind is the fact that I think most of the guys that were, flying airplanes into buildings hail from Saudi Arabia. So it is the cradle of Islam. It is the seat of Islam. And understandably, the president wants to try to work with the Saudis and these other governments. And I think he was very bold, to say that some of the things that he did right there in Saudi Arabia, in the cradle of Islam. And so kudos to him for that. And so I hope that, these are one of these deals that his abilities are going to come into play and perhaps persuade them to help or to come alongside of the United States and others to eradicate ISIS and other such groups from the world. I would add to that, I don't think there's any love lost between some of these radical groups and the Saudi government. I know that there's a great deal of animosity between certain sects of Islam and the House of Saud. And they see them, many of them see them as illegitimate. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, you would think it's kind of in the best interests of the ruling families in Saudi Arabia to want to get rid of these radicals. So I'll summarize all that and just say that it was a very nice gesture on their part, and I hope that is indicative of what's really in their heart to cooperate with the United States.
Well, and I think that was one of the criticisms, what you were talking about too, that, they have been known for state-sponsored terrorism. And so a lot of people were not happy with the fact that the president went to Saudi Arabia and they talked about Iran, rather than talking about Saudi Arabia, where we have people from the San Bernardino, 9/11, and that type of thing. So, but I think what people fail to remember is that we've had this relationship with Saudi Arabia since 1932, for better or for worse.
That's right. That's right. And so he's not the first president to try to reach out to the Saudis.
No, not at all.
By any stretch.
Yeah, and we've known about this state-sponsored terrorism all this whole time. It's not something new, but I think a lot of people were sort of hypercritical of President Trump when they had forgotten, or wanted to conveniently forget, I guess, that we've had this long-term relationship. I really like to see the fact that what we were openly talking about terrorism, and
Right.
it's a hard thing because you can't. I mean, you can, but it's hard to go on somebody's soil and say, look, you're the one that's causing all of this. You're the state-sponsored terrorist, blah, 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 blah. I think he did it in a very diplomatic way, saying,
Well, that's what I was alluding to. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it was really good that, he put it that way, and instead of insulting them, which he could have done and just called them straight out. But he did in his speech say, we're not here to be like something of the words of, we're not here to be critical of how you lead your life and how you run your country and what you do. That's kind of like your business. But here are some things that really need to be worked on. Did you find, I mean, one of the things that kind of creeped me out, I'll have to say, was that,
orb?
Yes.
Yeah. That didn't give me warm fuzzies.
Yeah. Didn't me either.
I'm still not real certain what that was all about, but that was one of those. I go, ooh, don't do that.
Yeah, I know.
But
I know. And that's the global center to combat extremist ideology. Why we needed a globe, why we needed to do that, that picture. I don't know. It was really something, out of science fiction and something out of, like a end times horror type movie to me,
Well, given what I do, I'm obviously going to be, what's the word I want to use here? Cautious about things like that. And, the president, I felt, gave as you said, diplomatic message to them. He said something to them without coming out and just saying directly to them and offending them in their own home. But I do think he got his point across. At least that's my interpretation of it as it relates to radical Islam. I guess, if I was going to be play the devil's advocate in this regard, it would be that, because it seemed kind of, mystical. And when you start dabbling with stuff like that, being a spiritually minded person, you can open the doors up to different things. And so, I would give him an X on that.
Yeah. And you wonder if he knew that was going to be a part of it. I mean, I would assume so.
You would hope so.
Yeah, you would hope so.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just, it looked occultish to me or something.
Very much so.
Yeah. And, I don't know if that is the culture, of Saudi Arabia, that they do things like that. So I'm not aware of that. So it may be something that's very normal in their culture. I don't know. Well,
I don't know that, but, and I'm going to be politically incorrect here. The very founding of Islam is steeped in, occultic encounters, spiritual encounters. Muhammad supposedly received this revelation of the Quran from different angels, and I think I'm using their words, demons, to write all these things down. So there are some occultic and spiritual aspects. And when I use the word spiritual, I don't mean it with a positive connotation. Right. The whole idea of a genie, that comes from that part of the world, and
right.
It's part of their culture. So I was really concerned to see the president participating in this. Whatever it was, it didn't look to be statesman-like,
Yeah.
And so, gosh, I probably should just stop there. But I'm very concerned about that. Yeah.
And I also think, they had the sword dance, which used to be the dance of going to war, and now it's used for celebration and weddings, which I don't know how you go from that to celebration, of weddings and all that. But he participated in that, and that was typically a dance for males only. And I believe during that they even offered, the opportunity for Ivanka and Melania to participate in that dance, which was something they never did.
Well, now that I read about that, I didn't actually see that. But, anytime you take Islam and pair it with a sword, usually it's not a good a good thing. But, it is, I'm sure it's part of the culture. I guess what I want to do here, Susan, is make it clear to people that while I am going to pray for the president and I'm going to pray God will watch over him, protect him, lead and guide him, that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with everything he does. And this is one of those things that, in an effort to rid the world of radical Islam, he's got to go to Saudi Arabia. He's got to go to these places. He's got to speak to these people and try to, if they're not, draw them to our side and see it's in your best interest to come alongside of us and help us rid the world of this threat. And I understand and support his going to these places in an effort to do that. I'm just hopeful that, and this will kind of perhaps, I don't want to get ahead of us where you want to go here, but eventually we're going to segue to this. I would like for him to also to make it very clear to the Saudis and the rest of the Islamic world that the United States is a steadfast ally of Israel and not get too chummy with those who would like to destroy the nation of Israel. Does that come across okay? Does that sound fair?
Oh, yeah. And I think, there were some people that took exception to something that he did say, kind of along that lines. He talked about the Holy Lands, and he was meaning Mecca and Jerusalem. And he was saying that, and here's the difference. A lot of people thought he was saying that Mecca and Jerusalem belong to, Islam or to the Saudis, and we acknowledge that. And that's not what he said. He said those who believe in Islam believe that Mecca and he didn't even mention Jerusalem, that there are two holy sites. And so I think in that regard, he didn't go against Israel and say, we agree with you, Islam, that Jerusalem belongs to you, type thing.
Well, if he said two holy sites, then he could have been referring to Mecca and Medina, because those are the first two holy sites in Islam. They consider Jerusalem to be the third most holy site. So again, I didn't hear that specific statement, but if he referred to two holy sites, it is probable that he was referring to Mecca, Medina, because that would be the first two holy sites in Islam. But that doesn't take away from the fact that Islam does consider Jerusalem to be their third most holy site. This is where Muhammad supposedly took his night journey on his stallion Barak and went up to heaven. Anyway, I just hope that the president and this administration will be steadfast in, yes, as we reach out to nations like Saudi Arabia to try to, be diplomatic and try to get them to come alongside of us in a joint effort to rid the world of radical Islam. I think Netanyahu would support that notion, but at the same time, make it very clear where we stand on Israel, and anyone who is going to be an advocate for destroying Israel, that we would stand against that. I hope that he stays on course there.
Yeah, and I think that, there were people in Israel who did not take offense to anything that happened in Saudi Arabia and did not take offense to anything that was said in Saudi Arabia. I don't think a lot of people, they thought that they were betrayed in any way by this president.
I would think that if they felt that way, that we would have heard about that in the news. I think it would have come from the prime minister's office. Yes. So I think if we want to take what's the word I want to use here? Sometimes, we can just be very narrow-minded in looking at things from a spiritual point of view, and we're not, I'm having a hard time thinking of the words today, practical in some of these things. God works through people in politicians and even kings of Saudi Arabia, so we have to be pragmatic in how we look at these things. And so I just see it that he's convinced that ISIS needs to be wiped off the face of the earth. I agree with him on that.
Yeah.
And so he's going to go to the very heart of the Islamic world, the most holy place, and as far as his Muslims are concerned, and he's going to speak to the people that rule that territory and say, hey, we need your help. And I dare say, and I don't know because I wasn't there, I dare say that behind the scenes, perhaps he was a bit more straightforward. At least that's what I'm choosing to believe.
Yeah. Well, and I believe that too. And he did in his speech say, the people who are here in the, the Muslim world, you are the one, you need to step up and take charge of this because it's your people who are doing this. I mean, he didn't make any bones about it, but there were some that criticized us even, or, the president in saying that we sold out, the United States sold out. And I'm still trying to figure that one out because we, I guess because for $110 billion now and a triple that over a 10-year period, we're going to be providing them with weapons, military weapons, so that they can be more in charge of taking care of themselves than having us protect them. This isn't anything new. We've been providing them with weapons all along.
Yeah, we have. And to that point, I want to interject some Bible into this, if I may.
Yes.
In times past, the United States has sold arms to Saudi Arabia and other countries. And at the same time, we've sold arms to Israel, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it all, but just kind of looking at it, trying to be practical about this. Not that we've always made the right decisions in this regard, but the logic, I guess, is arm the Saudis to defend themselves against those in the Islamic world that would try to take them down, not so much to use it against Israel. Because let's face it, there hasn't really been anything in modern history to suggest the Saudis have any interest in a conventional war with Israel. Now, that's not to say they're not working behind the scenes, but they're not going to get into a conventional war with Israel. So what are the arms about? I believe, and I think Bible backs this up, that they need to be defending themselves against those in the Islamic world that want to take them down. And here's one of the reasons that I'm convinced of that. Because in the book of Daniel, this guy that we would call the Antichrist, one of the first things he does is it says, I'm going to put it in literal English. It's in King James, it's worded a little different. It says the fattest places of the province. He comes into the fattest places of the province. Well, literally what that says, he comes into the oily districts of Medina.
Wow.
And that's the first thing that he does to try to solidify his power. So what does that suggest? Number one, the Antichrist is probably not from the Holy Roman Empire or revived Roman Empire. He's probably from the Islamic world. He's probably from the radical Islamic world. And one of the first things he's going to do, according to the Bible, as I understand it, he's going to go into Saudi Arabia. And he's going to try to overtake and take away from the House of Saud the oily districts of Medina. That's where Muhammad came from. And he's going to go into Mecca. And then he's going to try to go to Jerusalem. So I hope you're following what I'm saying here. There are large factions in the Islamic world, Iran being probably the biggest, who would love nothing more than to see the House of Saud wiped off the face of the earth so that they could come in and take over what they consider to be their holy sites. Think back when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and all of that started. Yeah. Well, part of his intention was in taking Kuwait and to accumulate that wealth was a first step in going into Saudi Arabia. He wanted to become the Islamic Messiah. That was he thought he was the guy and he was going to try to make this happen. And so Kuwait was just part of his plan to eventually go into Saudi Arabia, and which is why George Bush, the elder, stepped in, got this coalition together to stop that. And the Saudis, if you'll recall, were very much in favor of that coalition of forces coming into into the Middle East, setting up bases there in Riyadh and all over Saudi Arabia, because they knew that if he was successful, he was coming for them. So all of that is to say, behind the scenes, there's things that are going on we're not privy to, but based on what the Bible has said, I know that this is a strategy within radical Islam to first take over what they consider to be their holy places, Mecca and Medina, and then they're going to go to Jerusalem. So hope that made some sense. But I don't see us arming Saudi Arabia necessarily as an affront to Israel, as long as we remain steadfast in supporting our ally, Israel.
Right. And I think it also shows that we believe that as well, because the whole time during the speech, and some people were even critical of this, he did point out about Iran being the enemy, which Iran is the enemy of Israel and the Saudi Arabia and of ours, really. And I think that we've seen the Saudis in the past recently wanting to be more open to the Jewish people. And, because they they've called Jewish Israelis, pigs and other derogatory names. And they've taught their children to say that supposedly in the schools and all that. And now they're saying, look, we need to stop doing this. We need to have a different way of looking at them. So, I mean, that's a step in the right direction. Whether that's really anything that they're actually doing, I don't know. But it's been talked about recently that that's what needs to be done. And so I don't think that Israel sees Saudi Arabia as much as a threat as they do Iran.
How many times have we heard Netanyahu come out and make a speech within the context of radical Islam and mention Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
I can't think of one. Yeah. Now, I'm not ignoring the fact that it's the cradle of Islam. There is state-sponsored terrorism there. Behind the scenes, who knows what they're doing. Right. And, and I have to say that as a believer, I'm very, very concerned about the spread of Islam in this country as the Saudis and other governments are funding the spread of Islam, not necessarily quote unquote radical Islam, but Islam, and particularly in our cities, Detroit and Chicago and all these places. I'm very, very concerned about that. But I guess what I'm if we were going to compartmentalize this, I don't see that the president sold out to the Saudis. I'm looking at it, he's probably trying to be diplomatic about some things in an effort to destroy the radicals. What is the old saying? The enemy of my enemy has become my friend.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's some merit to that argument, I guess.
When you mentioned that too about the spread of Islam, a couple of weeks ago we talked about the San Diego Unified School District and the study that CARE did about Muslim children being bullied in school, and the San Diego Unified School District decided they were going to have safe rooms for the Muslim children there, and also teach about Islam in social studies. That was going to be what they were going to implement. The parents came out totally opposed to it. The general consensus of the public is totally against it. And the school wouldn't stop, just kept going. And so now I just wanted to let everybody know that there has been a federal lawsuit filed to try and stop that. So I think that's something that we certainly need to be more aware of in this country, and to try to stop creeping Islam, if you will, coming into our laws and all that other.
And it needs, it needs to be said, and people need to understand that Saudi Arabia is very much involved with these groups like CARE, and a lot of the funding comes from Saudi Arabia. Actually, I guess you could make the argument a lot of the funding comes from you and me every time we go to the gas station, and as long as we're dependent on Arab oil, we're indirectly responsible for that too. So I guess I want to make sure that people understand I don't consider myself a friend of Saudi Arabia, and what goes on in Saudi Arabia, and the fact that they do promote Islam and try to spread it abroad. And at the same time, you and I can't go to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, stand on a street corner and talk to people about the Messiah. Right. It's just the way it is,
Exactly.
But in the context of combating radical Islam and ISIS and these groups, I completely understand the idea of we're going to go to these people. We're going to see if we can get them to come alongside us and fight these people. And then some of these other issues that we have between the two nations, we'll deal with that. But let's take care of this big threat right here, and let's neutralize this first. And then it's like going back to World War II. You know, you had people like Patton telling Eisenhower, look, you know, we're fighting the Nazis, but we better be ready as soon as we get through the Nazis to start fighting the communists, the Russians, the Soviets, you know. And we allied ourselves with the Soviets. All right. Why? Because the greater threat, the immediate threat, was Hitler and the Nazis. It was not, or at least there were some who were not ignorant of the fact that the Soviets can be just as bad.
Yeah.
But we need to deal with this threat first, then we'll deal with the Soviets. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here.
No, and I totally get that. And I think that's true. You know, a lot of people too were critical of the fact that the president decided to go to Saudi Arabia first and not go to, let's say, Israel. And they were trying to make something of that. I don't see that. And again, I don't think Israel was, you know, they felt they were slighted by that in the least. I think the fact that I believe it's the first sitting president that on a Middle East tour, if you will, chose to go to Israel as well. So I think Israel saw that as this is really a great thing. Nothing bad at all or poor, like some of the people, especially the people on the left, were trying to make it out to be.
Well, I mean, the people on the left, they're gonna badger this guy, you know, over everything. Uh-huh. So I think we can discount any, you know, complaints they may have. I was impressed that he did go to the Western Wall, not because I believe prayers offered at the Western Wall are any better than prayers offered in our living rooms, but it was a gesture. And yes. I understand that he is the first sitting president to do so. I know several years ago, a friend of mine was in Jerusalem and George Bush was there, but this was just before he announced that he was going to run for president. So Trump's the first sitting president to go to the Western Wall. And just for those who may not know, the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, as some people like to call it, is the last remnants of Herod's temple. This would have been part of the temple compound that stood when Jesus walked the earth. And so Jews all over the world believe that because this is a direct connection to the temple, they go there to pray. And so it is, it's a big deal when presumably the most powerful man in the world goes there, and dons a kippah, you know, a yarmulke, and which on the top of that hair looked kind of odd. But anyway, that's another story. And he goes in, you know, offers prayers. And so it was a good gesture. I personally would have loved for him to said, you know, in that kind of a setting, you know, we're going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I have to say that's a little bit of a disappointment so far. I'm hopeful that that's not yet, you know, a final decision on that has been. I hope a final decision has not been made on that in, you know, not moving it. We'll have to wait and see. But all in all, I think that his trip there was a good gesture. I mean, his son-in-law is an Orthodox Jew. I would like to think that there's going to be a little bit of positive influence toward Israel in that regard.
Yeah, and I know that you know, he's friends with Benjamin Netanyahu and everything else. I mean, it was all in all, I think it was a really good trip. I would have loved to have known what he wrote and put into the Western Wall, what that said. I would love to have seen that.
But did you see how he was really burying it back in there? I mean, he was really pushing it back in there. I guess maybe I'm going to hide it, you know? I don't know.
Didn't want anybody else to get in. But I think also, you know, I just think that with the embassy talk, and I get this from a secular viewpoint, now is not the time to talk about the embassy. But when you're trying to bring peace in the Middle East, which we all know can't be accomplished, but, you know, is what we're trying to do right now in America and everything else. But when you're trying to do that, now would not be the time to say we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, because I think that would just be, in the Arab world, it'd be all over. That would be it.
No doubt about it, that to make that announcement is going to send the Arab world into a flying duck fit, as my dad used to like to say. All right. But I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. Again, this is something that you said you were going to do.
I know.
Right. And so this falls under the heading, as far as I'm concerned, doing what's right, regardless of what everyone else does. And so this is what, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, as believers that supported President or candidate Trump, they believe that God had, brought this man in this position to do the right thing, to kind of get this country back on the right track. Now, that he is president convinces me, whether I supported him or not, that for right now, he's God's man. Okay? And that doesn't necessarily mean he's a man of God, but it means he's God's man to do God's purposes. Now, here's where I'm going with this. I don't know that it suits God's purpose right now to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I really don't, It might serve God's purposes for it to remain just the way it is. But as an individual, that would love to see this very, very adamant and concrete support for Israel, I would like to see that. Looking at it practically, absolutely. To do that would set the Arab world, they'd go nuts.
Yeah.
But do I want to see it happen? Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to see it happen too. But I think, with the talk that he had with Abbas, the Palestinian leader before, and Netanyahu when Abbas was in Washington, D.C., and when Netanyahu was there separately in D.C., I think he still has hopes that there's going to be a peace agreement entered into. I did find out that recently, I guess Abbas came to Bethlehem, and there was a meeting there, and they were, there's speculation anyway, that Donald Trump was yelling at Abbas and saying, "You lied to me. You lied to me," during the Washington.
Surprised.
Yeah, I'm being surprised. I know. I guess maybe for Donald that was a surprise. I don't know, but and saying, why are you still paying the families of those that commit terrorism if you were truthful about what you were saying? And now I think he has learned that you can't trust the PLO. I mean, we should have known that,
Well, I hope so. I really do, because Abbas is, to say that Abbas wants peace, to me is laughable. Here's what Abbas wants. He wants a piece of land and another piece of land and another piece of territory.
Yeah.
That's what Abbas wants. And so, I'm just a little guy here observing, and I've figured that out.
Yeah.
That's what he wants. I would really like to think that a man with the reputation that Donald Trump has of being, the wheeler dealer, I would like to think he's picked up on that and knows that this guy lies through his teeth. And that's, again, getting politically incorrect here. That is something that the Islamic world, and I'm not saying every Muslim, but the Islamic world does. It's called hudna, which is a ceasefire. It's not peace.
Right.
It's not the cessation of hostilities. It's a ceasefire. We'll quit firing at you with this connotation until we get stronger than you. Yeah, and so when they say peace, that's what many of them have in mind, a ceasefire.
Yeah. And I do think that it is a cultural difference that he may not be familiar with and other people may not be familiar with. And that's why, that he had some hope that there was going to be a peace agreement. And I think, unfortunately, I still believe that he thinks there's going to be an opportunity to have a peace agreement between Israel and the PLO. I really do. Even after all that happened, even after he should know that they're going to lie and that's going to be it, I think he's going to continue to push for it. And I think he's going to continue to believe that it is possible somewhere down the line. And because, also he's come out and he's told everybody, this is what we're going for. This is what we're, on track for. So I think now he's kind of obligated to have to go do that.
So Jared Kushner is the Antichrist. Is that what you're saying?
Could be. I know. Oh my gosh. Poor guy. Yeah.
Well,
So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens there.
I guess it's expected for every president when he comes into office to try to broker peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I'm just going to say that ultimately, and this is coming not from a political point of view, strictly a scriptural point of view, it's going to happen eventually, but it's not going to be a good thing.
Right. I know. And I think, I don't know, if anybody could do it, I think Trump has a good chance of getting that agreement, which I know that makes me and other people kind of uncomfortable to know that he would be a part of what would lead us into that tribulation period.
Yeah.
But again, God's will, whatever God's plans are, and I, like you, Bill, I do believe that Trump was chosen by God and elected by God. There's no other way that would have happened. I mean, really, there wasn't. And for whatever purpose, I don't know. But
I let me just clarify my position here. I am not saying that, like some others have said, I'm not saying he's Cyrus.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying he's a man of God. I don't know. All I can do is look at the fruit and make a determination. And frankly, some of the fruit bothers me. I have grave concerns, quite frankly, about some of the fruit. That being said, he's in power, and that convinces me he's God's man, not necessarily a man of God. I believe Barack Obama was God's man. George Bush was God's man, not that they were men of God, but they were there for a reason, and that was to serve God's purposes. And if nothing else, to get believers in this nation and around the world to come to their senses, to realize, hey, we're in big trouble and we need to start praying. We need to start seeking God. If that was the whole purpose of the Obama administration, then that's a good thing in that respect. So I don't want people to think that I am, I'm going to defend Trump on anything and everything because I believe he's anointed of God. I'm not, I'm just going to say that I believe that because he has been placed in power, he's God's man to serve a purpose. And should it happen that he does broker some kind of peace treaty, between Israel and the Palestinians, that doesn't make him the Antichrist. It just means that he's playing a role in God's purposes because God's going to have his will done. And a lot of times, Susan, we just have to come away scratching our heads. Okay, God, I know you're in control, but I really don't understand what you're doing.
Well, and I also think it's important to point out when you say that, like looking at Donald Trump and some of the fruit isn't so good, I think you could say that with every man and woman.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So I didn't want people to think that we were just pinpointing Donald Trump and saying that. I think as human, and that's what we all should remember though, as he is a human being. I mean, and I know a lot of people really love him, and that's great. But you also have to know that he's a human being. He has faults like the rest of us. And God has chosen all of us for whatever purpose we have at the time.
Right. And I only bring that out because, there are some who have, because they want him to be there, will defend anything and everything. We can't do that. We can't do that. We have to be consistent. We can't, get on the anti-Obama thing because he did this, and this, and then change, and because it's a different person doing this, and this, well, that's okay. No, we have to be consistent, and the scripture has to set the boundaries. So, absolutely, he's like everybody else, myself included, fallible, false. He's gonna make mistakes. He's gonna say stupid things, and but the difference here is between you and me. He's the most powerful man in the world right now.
That's right.
And so scripturally, this is what the Bible says. He's going to be held to a higher standard than a lot of people, which then brings us to this point. Whether we agree with him or not, if we're believers, we need to be praying for the man.
Yeah.
We need to be praying for those around him. And we need to pray that God gives him the wisdom to do God's will. And if God's will doesn't make sense to my understanding, my perception, we're just going to have to say, God, let your will be done.
Yeah. Well, and I just think it's also important for people to remember that, people are very hypercritical of anybody who's the president, and especially this president more than any other president I've ever seen. I mean,
that I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. In our lifetimes. And, I think it is imperative that we pray for him and we pray for the whole administration. I think it would be very difficult, and I'm not, this is not sort of, sticking up for him or not. I mean, just in general, I want to say, I think it would be very difficult to be a Christian as a president and have to be sort of conducting business, if you will, in the secular world. Because, like going over to Saudi Arabia, you want to do what's biblically correct, but yet you're not in a biblically respected country, and then you've got to be, okay, well then do I need to look at it more on a secular basis, secular level, so that I'm not, putting my beliefs on theirs because we're totally different. I mean, see how confusing that could all get.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for us to be armchair quarterbacks.
Right.
We're not in that position, and I don't want it.
I don't either.
I am not interested. I mean, it would be a difficult thing. I don't think it'd be impossible.
No.
I just think it would be very difficult. But he's there.
Yeah.
He's the man right now. Although, there's a lot of people working overtime to see if they can do something about that, which now I don't want to get sidetracked here too much, but, just thinking this thing through, let's say these radicals and the Antifa and all the media and these progressives, both in the Democratic and Republican Party, are able to, get an impeachment and a process going, and the trial's brought to Senate, and they remove him from power. Well, then they've got President Pence, who I understand is a very devout Christian. So I'm not saying that that's the way I want it to go. I'm just saying if this is their plan, they're going to end up with someone that seemingly is a lot more Christian in his views than Donald Trump. Anyway, that was a sidebar, but just a thought.
Yeah, and it's when you say that, it doesn't make any sense why they're trying to do that and impeach Donald Trump because of that. I mean,
that's the point. It doesn't make any sense.
Makes no sense at all.
It's their hatred for the man.
Yeah.
Has blinded them. I mean, it seems maybe has blinded them to. You think you don't like what he stands for? Gosh, if you remove him, look what you're going to get.
I know. And we should probably, talk a little bit about that. I've never seen, presidency where they're literally calling it, we're going to have a war room, and not a war room against the outside influences, but a war room about what's been going on against this president in this country. And Steve Bannon it looks like he's going to be the one charged with that to sort of, I won't say to do the PR on it, but there's been, with the Russian influence of the election and all this Russia talk, Steve Bannon's going to be the one that goes out there and sort of now starts pushing back against all the stuff that's been coming against Donald Trump. And we used to see it coming weekly, and it went to daily, and then it went to hour, especially with the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Well, I heard somebody say this the other day, and I kind of thought about it. I'm like, I think this is true. And that is because the attacks on the Trump administration have been so vicious and unceasing. The people on the left and these progressives are actually pushing people who were not Donald Trump fans to be Donald Trump fans because they see how just one-sided this all seems to be. And I found myself, because as you know, I've never been a big Trump supporter for different reasons. But at the same time, these people are kind of making me go, I want to take up for this guy, because it's just unrelenting what they're doing. But it's back to your point about the war room. Here's another principle, and this is found in Scripture. And Lincoln picked up on this too, and made statements to this effect. And I won't try to quote him. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was basically this. If the United States falls, it's not going to be because of an external power. It's going to be because we kill ourselves from within. It's going to be that internal foe that brings us down. Right. And the biblical principle there is the tares sown in the midst of the wheat. It's not the external foe necessarily. It's the foe that's sown in the midst of the wheat. Right. And for a long time, I used to think, and I haven't really changed on this, that it's Islam, the radical Islamists, that is the spearhead, if you will, the tip of the arrow, so to speak. But I'm also starting to believe that it's all of these radical groups, that are really tearing us down from within. So in light of what you just said, that there's a war room, and there's a group of people getting together to see how to combat these things, that's probably where the greater threat is right now. Yeah. It's not the external foes, not Russia. It's what's going on inside this nation and some of those progressives who are espousing the whole Russian collusion thing. It's like, it reminds me of things I've taught through the years about the adversary, the way he works. He is an illusionist. An illusionist wants you to look in this hand at the flower or the handkerchief or whatever sparkly, shiny, colorful thing he has in this hand. This is where he wants your attention. Why? Because he doesn't want you to see what he's doing with this hand.
Right.
And that's what's going on here. I'm convinced of it.
Well, I mean, it is amazing that we have the attacks that just occurred in Manchester in the UK. And then we still have the court system here in the United States keeping us from the travel restrictions that we need in order to vet people properly so that we won't have the same thing occurring here. And so if anything, the court system has now become part of, quote unquote, the enemy because they're trying to act without as the power that they have. Actually, they're trying to act as president of the United States is what they're doing.
Well, it's kind of working in tandem with what I believe is the tip of the spear. It works together. One allows them in, the other takes advantage of that and exploits our stupidity,
yes.
As it were. Or I don't know, maybe it's not that they're stupid. Maybe this is what they want to see happen. Radicals want chaos.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and I still haven't found out if this is true or not. I mean, there's a lot of people that have started to talk about it now. So they said quietly last week, Rex Tillerson went ahead and increased the number of refugees that we're going to be receiving starting, I think, in like June or July from 800 a week to 1,500 a week. And I'm still waiting for the White House to say, confirm or deny that. Now, there was something that Obama had put into place that would increase the amount each year. I don't know if it has to do with that or if this is something new. And that is something, again, here, this is the worst time to be increasing the number of refugees when a time we don't have travel restrictions. When now the court is saying even what Obama had, the 6 Muslim countries is unconstitutional or whatever thing that they're coming up with now. I mean, we need to go to the Supreme Court and get this resolved quickly. We should, from my opinion, we should have done that at the very beginning. And yet it just continues to linger on. And if we are bringing in more refugees, what are we doing to ourselves?
Well, if that is true, boy, that doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't.
If you've got, on one hand, the president signing executive orders to restrict, refugees or so-called refugees coming in from the different nations, and the Secretary of State trying to something doesn't make sense there. I don't know. But did I not hear or read that Sessions, the Attorney General, has put this recent ban that these courts block hadn't isn't he trying to push that get that on a fast track to the Supreme Court to have it resolved?
Just the other day when the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia blocked it again, kept the temporary restraining order in place. That's when Sessions said, okay, we need to go on to the Supreme Court.
Well, they do. And hopefully,
yeah,
there's at least 5 people with some common sense up there. I really, really hope so.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I do see us sometimes as a country that is destroying ourselves from the inside out, and think issues like this. Yeah.
We are. We are our greatest enemy, and within our borders is the greatest threat. And I don't just mean those who've immigrated here who want to destroy us. Yeah. It's those that, want to tie law enforcement's hand behind their back. It's those who want to be politically correct at the expense of committing national suicide.
Yeah,
Lincoln was right. That if it happens, if this nation comes down, it won't be from Russia. It won't be from the Chinese. It'll be because of what we did to ourselves. Because that is a biblical principle. You think about, since Israel became a nation in 1948, how many conventional wars they have fought, and how many have they lost?
Yeah,
not a one.
No.
Okay, but what's Israel's greatest threat today? It's the factions within Israel that want to give away land, that want to give away this, that want to give away that. That's Israel's greatest threat, and it's always been this way, particularly where God's people are concerned. So. Not ignoring the fact that the Russians would love nothing more to see us crumble and fall. But if they sit back and wait, they won't have to lift a finger.
No.
All they'll have to do is, when this thing becomes a hollowed out house of cards, is just go push, and the whole thing falls down. That's historically what happens. So, that being said, we need to pray for this president and this administration to get wisdom from on high, to do what's right and what is in the best interest of this nation, with this caveat: as long as God's will is being served.
Yeah. And I think, with Israel too, I think the people are so fooled and think that if we can just give up some land, we could finally have peace in Israel, and it is those people who, as in the United States, who believe if we could just coexist with it, radical Islam, we would all be
Katy Perry's, everything would be okay, right?
No barriers, no borders,
no borders. Everybody would be okay. Well, here's what God says to that in Isaiah. He says to Israel, you made a covenant with death. And I'm not going to let that stand. You entered into covenant with me first, and now you've went out and made a covenant with death. Well, I'm not going to let it stand. I'm going to let you see what happens when you make a covenant with death. And that's in effect what we're doing now.
Yeah, it is. And it's just, you look at the elitists, and there are elitists and globalists in this country. It's not a new concept. They've been around forever, but they are so filled with the need and the want to control that they're willing to allow the whole world, effectively to be destroyed in order for them to try to get power. I mean, whatever it takes, whether it's their own self-destruction or of the country or the world, it doesn't matter. And it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. I mean, it actually happens, and we're seeing it on a daily basis. And even with the people that are attacking this president, it's not even anymore that you have to have any truth or facts to back what you're saying. You just come out and make any allegation you want, and the public is supposed to believe that and just accept it and move on and continue to destroy this man and this presidency.
Well, they're creating chaos. Chaos doesn't have to be just people marching in the streets burning things. Chaos can be, I don't know what the truth is anymore. So
we've gotten there. We've gotten there.
That's the point. We are there. It is chaos. It's every day. Now, if I could speak one thing to the president, and if he would listen to me, I would say, hey, learn to pick your battles. Don't get into a war words with, some of these people, Be a statesman. Don't get into a nya with people. But that's just how I feel about it. Because sometimes he can be his own worst enemy in some of these things when he gets into these little Twitter battles. But going back to the main point here, they are creating chaos. That's what they want to create because they are convinced that out of the chaos, they will emerge with all the power. And so it's not really a conspiracy theory. I'm not a big guy for conspiracy theories. This is just a conspiracy reality.
Right.
That's what they're doing.
Well, and speaking about Twitter, there's some talk now that they're going to have the president maybe have a team of attorneys that will look at his tweets before he actually tweets them out.
Maybe his wife should look at them first.
Yeah. I just can't even believe that. But I mean, he tweeted out the other day and I thought it was pretty good. But that I think right now the worst enemy he has in the country is like Washington Post and New York Times. They didn't like the fact that he called them fake news and has for a long time. And this is their way of getting back at him. And they're doing a really good job at it.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're good at what they do, aren't they? So, and maybe he didn't take that into consideration. I don't know. But it is what it is now. And I think he should let his wife read them first. Wives have a way of tempering their husbands that when they're wanting to do make this little knee-jerk response, wives have a way of speaking wisdom into our lives. So I don't know, just a thought.
Well, and she can speak 6 different languages, so perhaps she could help him with that. Maybe in the translation too.
Yeah, and maybe help him with his grammar. I don't know.
I know. I can't even imagine what he goes through, and the thing of it is, he's 70 years old, and they seemingly look like they stayed up for 9 days. I mean, I know they slept at some point, but really, how many people could have done what he did and what Melania did, but she's a lot younger, over that length of time, and he's out today.
Well,
so he didn't rest.
We need to pray for the man, and my prayers are that God, I just pray that you will anoint him to do the right thing. Regardless of whether I agree with it, if it's in right standing with your will and your purpose, that's what I want. That's what I want him to do. I don't want him to do what's right for the Republicans. I don't even necessarily want him to do what's right for American interest, because sometimes American interest can be skewed as well. I want him to do what's right in the eyes of God, because if we do that, if he does that, then the entire nation is going to benefit.
Yeah, it'd be interesting too to see what he does as far as climate change, and if we're going to pull out of that summit, and what the response is going to be. I really hope that we do. And I will say one more thing before we go too. I thought he did an excellent job in front of NATO, telling them, "Hey, you know what? Time to pay up. We've been paying for way too long." That was really nice to hear.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
it's going to be an interesting 4 years.
Well, and I hope it's 8, but we'll see.
Well, at least 4 years. It's going to be interesting. So
yeah, it's going to be interesting. So we'll have on the radar. We have to look and see what happens with James Comey coming up, the former FBI director, what he does. As you know, I don't like that whole relationship he has with the quote unquote independent counsel. So we'll see where all that goes to, but. Until next time, Bill, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We'll be back again next Tuesday. Hopefully on Tuesday, we'll be live this time. So, Again, take care. God bless, and we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.